Living inside a nuclear submarine is unlike anything else on this planet. It's a sealed steel tube 560 feet long where 155 sailors work and live for 90 days straight in complete isolation beneath the ocean's surface. Just 42 feet of width for all these people to sleep, eat, work, and survive while carrying enough firepower to reshape the world. And it's quite impressive how these sailors adapt to this extreme environment, how they coordinate every aspect of their daily routines to function as a single organism while thousands of feet below the waves where a single mistake could be catastrophic. Just a moment. If you're into military documentaries like this, subscribing would mean a lot. It's the best way to support the channel. Back to the submarine. We're talking about the Ohio-class nuclear submarine, a vessel that costs $4 billion and represents one of the most confined yet technologically advanced living environments ever created. These submarines can stay submerged for months at a time, limited only by the amount of food they can store, not by fuel or air. The nuclear reactor provides virtually unlimited power and generates oxygen from seawater. But the human challenges? Those are solved through rigid discipline, creative adaptation, and a level of coordination that most people can't even imagine. Sleeping quarters. Let's start with where these 155 sailors sleep, because this is where the reality of submarine life really hits you. On an Ohio-class submarine, there are approximately 130 sleeping racks for 155 crew members. Yes, you heard that right. More people than beds. The bunks themselves are stacked 3 high in most berthing compartments, each one measuring just 6 feet long, 2.5 feet wide, and about 18 inches of vertical space. Sailors call them coffins, and once you see one, you'll understand why. Each rack has a curtain for privacy, and that curtain represents your only personal space on the entire vessel. Behind that curtain, you've got a thin mattress, a reading light, and maybe 2 cubic feet of storage space for everything you own for the next 3 months. That's your clothes, toiletries, books, photos, everything. Some sailors get creative and use vacuum bags to compress their belongings, squeezing out every bit of air to maximize what they can bring. But since there aren't enough beds for everyone, the submarine operates on a practice called hot bunking or hot racking. This means that 3 sailors might share 2 bunks, rotating based on their watch schedules. When you finish your 6-hour watch shift, you head to a bunk that someone else just vacated, and yes, it's still warm. You sleep for 6 hours, then get up and start the cycle again. It's continuous musical chairs with beds, operating 24 hours a day for the entire patrol. The thing is that junior enlisted sailors have it toughest. Their berthing areas are often located near noisy machinery spaces or next to the torpedo room. Plus, they're in the most cramped sections of the boat where the hull curves inward. Senior enlisted and officers get slightly better accommodations. Chiefs have their own berthing area called the goat locker, and officers have staterooms that might house 2 to 3 people instead of 20 to 30. The captain and executive officer are the only ones with private cabins, though calling them cabins is generous. They're barely larger than a walk-in closet. Toilets, showers, laundry. Moving on to personal hygiene, and this is where submarine life gets really interesting. An Ohio-class submarine has approximately 8 toilets and 3 shower stalls for those 155 people. To put it into perspective, that's about 19 people per toilet and over 50 people per shower. Now you might think that sounds impossible, but the Navy has it down to a science. Showers are strictly limited to 3 to 5 minutes per person, and that includes the time to get wet, soap up, and rinse off. The submarine has to produce its own fresh water from seawater using evaporators, and while the nuclear reactor provides unlimited power, the evaporators have a maximum output. Fresh water is precious. You use it for drinking, cooking, cooling equipment, and only then for personal hygiene. Most sailors become experts at what's called a Navy shower. Water on for 30 seconds to wet down, water off while you soap up, then water on for 90 seconds to rinse. But there's a special privilege called a Hollywood shower. That's when you can leave the water running for the full shower duration. It's considered a luxury and typically only happens when the submarine is returning to port and water conservation becomes less critical. Some captains award Hollywood showers as a reward for exceptional performance. In fact, earning a Hollywood shower is such a big deal that sailors will talk about it for weeks. The toilets themselves require training to use, yes, actual training. Submarine toilets use a complex system of valves and compressed air to flush waste into sanitary tanks. If you open the wrong valve at the wrong time, you can get what sailors call a facial from the sea. It's happened to enough new sailors that there's mandatory toilet training during their first week aboard. The procedure involves multiple steps: close valve A, pull handle B, open valve C, wait for the pressure to equalize, then push the flush lever. Laundry is another coordinated operation. The submarine has 2 washing machines and 2 dryers for the entire crew. There's a sign-up sheet, and you might get to do laundry once every 10 to 14 days if you're lucky. Each sailor gets about 30 minutes of machine time. This means most submariners become very selective about what clothes actually need washing. Many will wear the same uniform for 3 to 4 days before considering it dirty enough to wash. Officers and chiefs get slightly better access to laundry facilities, but even they have to schedule and coordinate kitchen and the food. Here's where things get surprising. The food on a nuclear submarine is famously excellent, arguably the best in the entire US military, and there's a very good reason for that. When you've got 155 people sealed in a tube underwater for 90 days with no sunlight, no privacy, no fresh air, and constant stress, food becomes absolutely critical for morale. The Navy knows this, so submarine chefs go through extensive specialized training, and the food budget per sailor is higher than any other naval platform. The submarine carries approximately 18,000 pounds of food for a standard patrol. That breaks down to about 100 pounds of frozen meat, 50 pounds of fresh vegetables, 30 pounds of dairy products, and 40 pounds of dry goods per sailor for the 3-month deployment. In the first 2 weeks, they eat fresh produce, lettuce, tomatoes, apples, oranges. After that, it's all canned, frozen, or dried, but the variety is still impressive. The menu rotates on a 21-day cycle, meaning you might have the same meal 3 times during a patrol, but never 2 days in a row. Storage gets pretty creative. Every available space is used. Food is stored under the crew's bunks, in bilge spaces, in missile tubes on ballistic missile submarines, even in shower stalls for the first few days until there's enough room in the regular storage. One submarine documented storing bags of flour in the machinery spaces where the ambient heat would actually help dry the flour and prevent mold. The galley crew becomes expert at Tetris-level organization because once you're underwater, there's no resupply. What you loaded is what you get. The galley itself is surprisingly small, maybe 200 square feet for all food preparation. There are 2 standard ovens, a deep fryer, a griddle, and a steam kettle. From this tiny space, the culinary specialists prepare 4 meals per day: breakfast, lunch, dinner, and midnight rations, for those coming off the night watch. That's over 600 meals prepared every single day in a space smaller than most home kitchens. The culinary specialists work in rotating shifts, usually 6 hours on and 12 hours off, but their off time often includes prep work, inventory management, and cleaning. These sailors are worth their weight in gold. A great submarine cook can make canned spinach taste gourmet, turn dried eggs into something resembling actual breakfast, and create birthday cakes from scratch in an oven that's constantly tilting with the boat's movement. Moreover, they handle special dietary requirements, religious meal restrictions, and try to mark holidays with special meals. Thanksgiving underwater still means turkey with all the fixings, unique aspects of submarine life. But since we're talking about one of the most unique military environments on Earth, there are some surprising exceptions and unusual traditions. For example, submariners are exempt from certain Navy grooming standards. In the old days, beards were allowed on submarines because fresh water was even scarcer and shaving wasn't considered a good use of resources. Today, most submarines require clean-shaven faces for oxygen mask safety, but the tradition of relaxed grooming standards during patrol continues in small ways. Medical care is handled by independent duty corpsmen. These are enlisted medical personnel with extensive training who can handle everything from stitches to dental work to emergency surgery. The submarine has a small medical space with basic surgical capability, but the corpsmen are trained for scenarios most military medics never face. There's documented cases of corpsmen performing emergency appendectomies using the wardroom table as an operating surface, with the submarine's chief engineer reading surgical instructions aloud from a manual while the boat pitched and rolled. The submarine also has its own barber, usually a collateral duty assigned to someone who showed any aptitude with clippers. Haircuts happen in whatever space is available, often with someone sitting backwards in a chair in the crew's mess while the barber works between meal services. It's fair to say that submarine haircuts are functional rather than fashionable. Another unusual aspect is the complete absence of windows. There are no portholes, no skylights, nothing. For 90 days, you see nothing but artificial light and steel bulkheads. The submarine could be at periscope depth with whales swimming past, or at 800 feet in absolute darkness, or under the Arctic ice sheet. And unless you're one of the few people with access to the periscope or sonar displays, you have no idea. Some sailors report that the thing they miss most isn't their families or fresh food, but simply seeing the sky. Free time. Now you might be wondering what sailors do when they're not on watch or sleeping, and the answer is not much, because there's not much space for it. The submarine has one crew's mess that doubles as the recreation area. When it's not being used for meals, sailors can watch movies on a screen that folds down from the ceiling, or play cards, or read. That same table where you eat dinner might be where someone's playing chess 2 hours later. The submarine carries a library of about 200 books and several hundred movies on hard drives, no internet streaming at 400 feet below the surface. Movies are shown on a rotation, and when you've been underwater for 60 days, you've probably seen every movie at least twice. Some sailors bring their own entertainment, books, handheld gaming devices with wireless capabilities disabled, or crafts. One sailor on record spent his entire patrol hand-carving an elaborate chess set from scrap wood. For physical fitness, space is extremely limited. The submarine has a few pieces of exercise equipment, maybe 2 treadmills, 1 stationary bike, and some free weights, all crammed into spaces repurposed from storage areas. But you can't run these machines during certain operations because the noise might compromise stealth. Equipment is scheduled in 30-minute blocks, and you might only get to work out 2 to 3 times per week. Some sailors do bodyweight exercises in whatever space they can find, push-ups between the bunks, pull-ups on pipe fittings, planks in the narrow corridors. Plus, social interaction happens in strange ways. Since everyone works different watch schedules, you might not see your best friend on the boat for days, even though you're both living in the same 560-foot tube. The crew develops a peculiar social rhythm where certain people always eat together because their schedules align, while others become ships passing in the night, trading notes and messages but rarely actually talking. Communicating with families. Here's one of the hardest parts of submarine service. Communication with the outside world is severely restricted. When the submarine is on patrol, especially during strategic deterrent missions, radio silence is critical. Any transmission can potentially be detected and tracked, so for most of the patrol there's zero communication with families back home. The submarine does have a system called family grams. These are short, pre-approved messages of about 50 words that can be sent from families to sailors. They come in maybe once a week if the submarine is able to receive communications safely. But these messages are heavily censored. They go through multiple reviews to ensure nothing could affect morale or mission focus. Anything about serious illness, death, financial problems, or relationship issues is often held until the submarine returns to port. The thing is that sailors miss everything. Babies are born, children take first steps, families face emergencies, and the sailor hears nothing until they surface 90 days later. One submarine officer described checking his phone when they pulled into port and having 47 voicemail messages, 3 months of texts, and finding out he'd become an uncle twice without knowing his sisters were even pregnant. There's absolutely no personal electronics with wireless capability allowed in operational areas. No Wi-Fi, no Bluetooth, no cellular signals. Smartphones are permitted in berthing areas but must have all wireless functions physically disabled. The submarine's communication systems are so sensitive that even a Bluetooth signal from someone's headphones could theoretically interfere with detection equipment or be picked up by adversary listening posts. Control room operations. The control room is the brain of the submarine, about 1,200 square feet packed with screens, consoles, and the most critical equipment on the boat. This is where the officer of the deck commands the submarine's movements, where the sonar operators listen for threats, where the navigation team plots course, and where split-second decisions are made that can mean the difference between successful mission completion and disaster. The diving officer sits at the ship control station with the plainsman and helmsman on either side. These sailors control the submarine's depth and direction using controls that look surprisingly similar to aircraft yokes. The plainsman controls the planes, the horizontal fins that angle the submarine up or down. The helmsman controls direction. Both positions require intense concentration because water is 800 times denser than air, and even small adjustments can have dramatic effects. Behind them, the chief of the watch manages the ballast control panel, a complex board of switches, gauges, and indicators that control the water flooding in and out of ballast tanks. This determines whether the submarine sinks or rises. It's one of the most critical positions on the boat, and it's typically manned by senior enlisted personnel with years of experience. One wrong valve at the wrong time could flood the boat or send it rocketing toward the surface. The sonar room is adjacent to the control room but separated by heavy curtains. Darkness helps the sonar operators concentrate on the sounds they're tracking through their headphones. These sailors can identify the acoustic signature of different ship types, distinguish a whale from a submarine, and detect contacts at ranges that seem almost supernatural. Modern submarines are so quiet that sonar operators are listening for machinery vibrations, blade rates from propellers, even the sound of water flowing over a hull. Security in the control room is absolute. Only qualified watchstanders are allowed inside during operations. Every action is verified by multiple people. When the officer of the deck gives an order, the helmsman repeats it back, executes it, then reports completion. This repeat-back procedure prevents miscommunication and has probably prevented countless accidents over the decades. But that's just the beginning of understanding life aboard a nuclear submarine. What we've covered so far, the sleeping, eating, basic routines, that's the foundation. But there are deeper layers to this experience that reveal just how extraordinary submarine service really is. The technical systems that keep these sailors alive, the training that prepares them for the impossible, the psychological challenges that nobody talks about, and the strategic importance that makes all this hardship worthwhile. The nuclear reactor and life support systems. Let's talk about what makes modern submarine warfare possible: the nuclear reactor. An Ohio-class submarine is powered by a S-8G pressurized water reactor that generates approximately 60,000 shaft horsepower. This reactor can run for 15 to 20 years without refueling, which means the submarine's operational range is truly unlimited. But more importantly for the crew, this reactor powers the systems that keep them alive. The reactor heats water to generate steam, which drives turbines for propulsion and electricity generation. That electricity powers every system on the boat: lights, computers, cooking equipment, and most critically, the atmosphere control systems. The submarine uses electrolysis to split seawater molecules into hydrogen and oxygen. The oxygen is released into the boat's atmosphere while the hydrogen is either vented overboard or burned in a special unit that combines it with waste, CO2, to produce water and heat. The atmosphere inside the submarine is constantly monitored and adjusted. CO2 scrubbers remove carbon dioxide that the crew exhales. Oxygen generators add fresh oxygen. Atmospheric control watches use sophisticated sensors to measure not just CO2 and oxygen levels, but also hydrogen concentration, radiation levels, and contamination from equipment off-gassing. The target is to maintain an atmosphere that's similar to being at about 8,000 feet elevation, slightly thinner than sea level but comfortable enough for long-term habitation. In fact, the crew often jokes that they're breathing the same air molecules that sailors breathed on the submarine 10 years ago. While that's not technically accurate, fresh oxygen is constantly added. There is truth to the idea that the boat's atmosphere has a certain staleness to it. After a few days, you stop noticing. After 90 days, stepping outside into fresh air when you finally surface can actually make you lightheaded, because your body has adapted to the submarine's atmosphere. Temperature control is another constant challenge. The nuclear reactor generates tremendous heat, and that heat has to go somewhere. Most submarines run warm, typically 75 to 80 degrees Fahrenheit throughout most spaces, sometimes hotter near machinery. The only way to dump excess heat is through the surrounding seawater, but there's limits to how much heat exchange is possible without creating a thermal signature that might be detected. So the crew just adapts to working in perpetual warmth. The reactor itself is off limits to most of the crew. Only personnel who've completed nuclear power school, a grueling 18-month training program, are allowed in the reactor spaces. These nuclear-trained sailors represent about 40% of the crew, and they're responsible for operating and maintaining not just the reactor but all the propulsion and electrical systems. They work in the back of the boat in machinery spaces that are louder, hotter, and even more cramped than forward areas. Moreover, these nuclear operators stand watches in the maneuvering room, the control center for the reactor and propulsion. It's about the size of a minivan interior, with 3 watch stations: the reactor operator, the electrical operator, and the throttleman. Above them sits the engineering officer of the watch who supervises everything. These 4 people control the heart of the submarine, and they do it in 6-hour shifts every single day of patrol. The safety culture in the nuclear program is legendary. Every procedure is written down, followed exactly, and verified by multiple people. Even routine operations involve multiple checkoffs and verifications. The Naval Reactors Program, which oversees all Navy nuclear operations, has maintained a perfect safety record since 1955. Over 5,700 reactor years of operation without a single reactor accident. That record exists because of the rigid discipline that every nuclear-trained sailor learns. But the human cost is real. Nuclear operators work longer hours than the rest of the crew. They have more qualifications to complete. They face more frequent inspections and evaluations. The stress of operating a nuclear reactor in combat conditions, where enemy action could damage systems and create catastrophic scenarios, is something they carry constantly. Yet they volunteer for this duty, and many stay for entire 20-year careers in submarine service, training, qualifications, and submarine Dolphins. Before a sailor ever steps aboard an operational submarine, they've gone through training that's among the most intensive in the military. For nuclear-trained personnel, it starts with Nuclear Power School in Charleston, South Carolina, 6 months of classroom instruction that's equivalent to a bachelor's degree in nuclear engineering, compressed into half a year. The academic failure rate is over 30%. Those who make it then go to Nuclear Power Training Unit to actually operate a nuclear reactor on land before they're trusted with one at sea. Non-nuclear sailors attend basic enlisted submarine school in Groton, Connecticut, where they learn basic submarine systems, emergency procedures, and the unique challenges of submarine service. This is where they first experience the submarine escape training tank, a 100-foot-tall water tower where they practice emergency ascent procedures. It's terrifying for many students, and it's meant to be. If the submarine ever sinks, they need to know they can escape. But arriving on the submarine is just the beginning. Every new sailor, regardless of their rating or specialty, must earn their submarine warfare qualification, the gold or silver Dolphins worn above the left pocket. This takes 6 to 12 months of intense study while also standing watches and doing your regular job. You have to learn every system on the submarine, be able to draw complex diagrams from memory, and demonstrate you could operate critical equipment in an emergency even if it's not your normal station. The qualification process involves checkouts with senior personnel throughout the boat. You might be a cook, but you have to learn the ballast control system. You might be a torpedo technician, but you have to understand the nuclear reactor's emergency shutdown procedures. The philosophy is simple. In an emergency, everyone needs to be able to help everywhere. There are documented cases where cooks helped fight fires in the reactor spaces, or nuclear operators helped load weapons. Psychological challenges and mental health. Now let's address something the Navy didn't talk about much until recent years: the psychological impact of submarine service. Living in a sealed tube underwater for 3 months creates mental health challenges that are unique in military service. The constant artificial light disrupts circadian rhythms. The lack of privacy creates stress. The isolation from family and normal life can trigger depression or anxiety. Sleep deprivation is the most common challenge. The 6 hours on, 6 hours off watch rotation sounds manageable until you realize you never get a full night's sleep. You're always sleeping in chunks. Plus, your sleep is constantly interrupted by drills, maintenance needs, or operational changes. Studies of submarine crews show that most sailors operate in a state of chronic sleep debt throughout the patrol, catching up only when they finally reach port. The Navy has started assigning psychologists to submarine tenders and conducting mental health training for submarine leadership. But the reality is that psychological support during patrol is minimal. The corpsman has some mental health training, and the chaplain, who deploys with certain submarines, can provide counseling, but it's limited. Most sailors rely on their shipmates, developing tight-knit support networks that help each other through the hard days. Interestingly, submarine crews develop a phenomenon psychologists call condensed intimacy. You become incredibly close to your crewmates in a matter of weeks, closer than many people get with friends they've known for years. You know their habits, their moods, their quirks. You can tell when someone's having a bad day just by how they walk. This creates incredibly strong bonds, but also means that interpersonal conflicts can become intense and impact the entire boat's atmosphere. Comprehensive conclusion. So here's what we're really talking about. 155 sailors who volunteer to live in conditions that would be considered extreme anywhere else, operating the most strategically important weapons platforms in existence, maintaining capabilities that prevent global conflict through sheer deterrence, all while sealed in a tube under thousands of feet of water where the outside pressure could crush them instantly if something fails. They sacrifice sleep, privacy, comfort, communication with families, sunlight, fresh air, and normalcy, not for days or weeks, but for months at a time, repeatedly throughout their careers. They master one of the most complex technical environments humans have ever created. They develop bonds with their crewmates that most people will never experience, and they do it knowing that the ultimate measure of success is that their weapons are never used. To put it into perspective one final time, over 70 years of nuclear submarine service, countless patrols by thousands of sailors, and the weapons have never been fired in anger. That's the real story. These sailors live this extraordinary, confined, challenging life as the guardians of a deterrent that works precisely because they're out there, somewhere, impossible to find and impossible to stop. It's quite impressive how humans adapt to the impossible and make it routine. The sailors on these $4 billion submarines prove it every single day in ways that most people will never see or fully understand. They are without question some of the most uniquely qualified and dedicated military personnel on Earth.